My name is Stefan Baumann, and welcome to the Baumann Effect number 15. Oh my God, I'm so excited about this particular episode. I'm going to actually be demoing a painting from start to about midway, kind of showing you what I do if I were out on location. I'm going to show you how to start a painting correctly. Making water. How do we actually capture reflections in water? I'm going to demonstrate the law of thirds and how a composition is put together. I'm going to teach you to paint what we see. I'm going to show you how to get a sense of place and foregrounds. We're going to talk about concepts. We're going to try to show how we pull all of these things together in a painting to try to bring luminosity and luminous to our paintings. And we're going to talk about brushstrokes and temperature. So much, so stay tuned. Baumann Effect number 15, you don't want to miss it. I'll talk to you on the other end. When I start a painting, I kind of think about getting some kind of concept together, something that will, make sense as a painting. And we talked last week about putting together a central focal point and where the light should be. And knowing the mountain, the light comes from the western side, and so we're going to have the western light coming into the painting. First thing what we want to do is we want to always kind of keep the viewer aware of the thirds. Now, back in the day, this would have been like the golden mean, but this is kind of a simplified version. We're going to be going into all of that stuff on the Patreon site, but this is a view of Mount Shasta from Bunny Flats. This is one of the locations that we actually go paint at. And I'm going to show you the picture real quick. And then I'm going to show you what we're going to end up doing with it. So here's a picture. So this is actually the place where if you were interested in climbing Mount Shasta, this is where you would start. And every year, a couple of people do get killed on this mountain. It's a major mountain, a major climb. And they do it in May and June. But this is at the parking lot. We usually sit here and paint as one of our workshop places. But the problem with this picture is that it's midday. And we don't want to paint anything that's midday primarily because it becomes a thing painting, and we don't paint things, we paint effects. Yeah. So anyway, there's Mount Shasta in all of her glory. A row of trees. Now, I always want to keep the center focal point within the middle third, and that's right here. Center focal point always has to be an effective light. Now, when we're painting things, we have to first learn how to paint. And that's why it's important to take painting classes and work with teachers and get that under your belt. But you kind of have to realize that we paint what we see. And you have to know that. And then when you paint what you see, paint what you see, like what's inside of you. So what I'm going to do is, when I saw this, I thought, oh wow, this would be kind of a great campsite at sunset. So I can imagine. And when I'm spending time looking at my compositions, I imagine what would happen there if I wasn't there. So like, maybe there's a campsite there with some people there, or it might be a bear that has come in and invaded a campsite. What a great story that's always. Mountain goats kind of come through, deer, all that. So you can imagine that. While you're painting outdoors, it's good to put those footnotes in. If you're going to put animals into your paintings, they have to be really, really good. That's the thing. If we have a central focal point, that's the effective light, but you stick an animal in, that animal better be perfect, because that could ruin a beautiful painting instantly. So, okay, so I'll start off with a little bit of a sketch. This is kind of a little bit of the foothills. And then my main central focal point is actually going to be here. And I want it to be the effective light. But what I'm going to do is actually lift a lake up and place it in the middle of my painting here. And instead of putting a meadow in, again, we're going to look at this again. Instead of putting a meadow in all here, I'm actually going to place a lake, which would allow me to have some wonderful lights skipping on the water. I'm going to have this foreground in here. I like the rock. It kind of shields us a little. It's a great little element to have, especially that falls into the middle third of the painting. So I can play with that and the lighting effect and the trees, but it gives me a real big sense of place. Now, if you know anything about me and you study, a sense of place is really crucial in a painting. It kind of makes the viewer feel like they're participating in the scene. It's important to put something in the foreground so that the viewer feels where they are in association. So like if you're floating over the Grand Canyon and you don't have a foreground and it's like being in a balloon. You want to start with the foreground first. And in this particular painting, the foreground is so prominent that I want to make sure that I kind of get most of that in here. Now, chances are, because I am working in this situation where you guys are kind of watching me, I actually work with a photograph. But I've gotten so used to painting out of my imagination that for me, I would just paint this without having a picture. But I started doing that in a couple of videos and people go, "What are you doing? What are you painting? I don't get it." You need that information. So you kind of have an idea of where I'm painting Bundy Flats. You kind of have an idea of the sense of place. So I'm going to put in a lot of foreground in here. Some trees. It's a horizontal painting, so I'm going to really try to get verticals into my painting. If it's a vertical painting, I'm going to try to get horizontals. The center of my painting, which would be like my horizon line, would be somewhere like in there. Now it's a horizon line because I'm looking straight forward. So right where my eyes are, that's a horizon wherever I am. That should be somewhere within the painting. And so if I'm standing on the sense of place on the foreground here, and I'm looking back, the horizon line should be pretty much where the center is. And that's that. And I'm going to bring the water just underneath that. That's where my lake will be. Now, that's only because if I actually walked all the way back there and stood on a rock area, that's where I would be in the painting. And notice it's dead center. Now, a lot of people say don't put something in the middle of your painting, but the reality is something's got to be there. And when we're looking at something, it's going to be in our center focal point in our eyes. So if, for instance, if I decide that I want to put a bear up here, which might be, kind of an interesting foreground, it's getting a bear to stand up there. I'm going to make sure that the bear is going to be in the middle somewhere, because I guarantee you, if you went out there to go paint and a bear showed up, you wouldn't be paying attention to trees at that point. You'd be looking at the bear. The bear would be in the center of your area. That'd be the center focal point area within your painting. So let's go ahead and start working on this. So we're working with a little bit more of a twilight, sunset kind of thing. I'm going to work with ultramarine blue, deep. One of the colors that I love to work with, some alizarin crimson. Ultramarine blue works really good for a warm bluish color. And I'm going to be working to the left with more cerulean blue and cobalt blue. So I'm going to go into that color. Right now it's just a footnote. It's like, oh my God, he's painting dark, but don't worry about it. I always like to go super dark and then pull it up. It's easier than to go too light and then try to go dark. And most likely, if I came to your studios and looked at most of your work, chances are your skies and your paintings are too light. That's why you don't get any effects on clouds, because you do the sky too light. Okay. White with cobalt blue. And this isn't a paint by number painting, so I don't care if I go over the lines a bit. Now, some students spend a lot of time drawing their line, and the problem with drawing your lines like that is that it becomes like a paint by number. And when you first got, a coloring book or a paint by number from your mom, the first thing she said is always stay within the line. So if you kind of have a line that's just kind of vague, you're not playing on that brain memory of staying within the line. Since the light's going to be coming from the left, so this actually is Western light coming into the painting, and I'm going to be changing the color and not so much the value, because I want to keep the sky rich. So paint should always be applied as if you're pushing around soft butter. When you squeeze paint out of the tube, pretty much some of the artists said that the paint that comes right out of the tube is almost perfect, but sometimes it's not. So you kind of have to like thin it down a little bit. But it should be the consistency of soft butter, not melted butter. So if you leave butter out on a normal day out on the counter and it kind of softens up, that's about the consistency. And you want to make sure that you have a nice amount. You scoop it on. I always tell my students is that you apply your paint the same way you would apply butter on a toasted bagel when you're not on a diet. Okay, so that nice rich, nobody's looking, it's like, oh, I'm going to put more butter on here. So you want to kind of have it that consistency. I make a lot of food references because I think people can identify with that. And then you're not painting a bathroom, and while I'm talking here, I'm not paying much attention. But if you're going to be doing a painting in your studio, you want to make sure that every brushstroke counts. Okay, and I don't want to spend a lot of time dawdling around, but if I were to do this, I would make sure that every brushstroke would be different. And a good brushstroke is when you hold the brush this way in your hand and you drag your brush across your canvas like that. So now we're going to put in, before I finalize whatever's going to be in here, I got to get rid of the white canvas. So I'm going to take Phthalo Red Rose. I don't use alizarin crimson anymore, not because it's fugitive, it's an ugly color. Yeah, so a color that's better is Phthalo Red Rose, and you can take a really bright color and kind of dull it down. So you can make alizarin crimson out of a really beautiful magenta or Phthalo Red Rose or permanent red rose or quinacridine rose or magenta. You can knock those colors down, but you can't bring up alizarin crimson. It's like, you add color to it, it's like, Then you have to have another color if you want to do bougainvillea or something like that. So I'm adding ultramarine blue with phthalo red rose. I'm going to lay in the base for my mountains. But Stefan, things get cooler and lighter as they get further back. It's like, yep, they do. So we will lighten that up, but that's just a footnote there. And then we're going to take asphaltum and ultramarine blue, cobalt blue to that. I'm going to put in a footnote for my trees. Okay. Now this area in here is going to be water. In here. So I'm going to actually start painting that area, and with water what you want to do is vertical lines. That's the one thing that I love about Rob Ross. He got that right. It's like you paint vertical, 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 vertical. So then I'm going to put a footnote in real quick. This is where I'm going to have my water light right there. And with my sky, I want to reflect some of that into my water. Keep in mind this is kind of twilight, so we're going to be putting in some beautiful lighting. Right now I'm actually toning the canvas. Now some students when they come to the workshop they go, do I tone all my canvases before we go? It's like, no, you don't. You tone them while we're here and you tone them like this. You kind of get your sketch in as you're working on it. I've had students show up at a workshop with 12 brown canvases toned and 12 blue canvases toned. I go, what's that for? They say, well, I just wanted to be sure that I had the right colors and stuff. And I said, I'd rather have you have no color. Because right now, this is in the concept stage, and you really need to be working on a white surface just to get the idea of the values and tones and your drawing. And sometimes when you have something on like this, you can wipe it off like that. Look at that. It's like, oh, wow, that's beautiful. Now, if my canvas was toned already, I wouldn't be able to get some of these beautiful colors. And in essence, you could actually even like go into the foreground here with a paper towel. Kind of lay in this. So in the beginning stages of the painting, and if we were outdoors, this would be the first 10 minutes, is that we start dealing with the concept. Now the concept is one of our 10 keys, and it's actually the first one. And that's the first thing that I do here, is that remember I said, well, I think we're going to be doing a lake. So what I'm doing right now is that I'm just trying to deal with the concept of what that actually would look like. And so now my canvas is actually toned. Now I want to show you why it's important. And when you work on oil-primed canvases or boards, this is even more important because you can wipe things off better. This is actually a stretch canvas that I'm using today. And the reason why I'm using a stretch canvas today is because last week I was here at Central Art and I got a great price on a frame. So I thought, okay, well, I'll do one of these demos for the frame. And if you want to see the original, you can go to the gallery in Mount Shasta, because that's what I'm painting it for. So anyway, so I could take a paper towel and I could wipe that off. See that? That gives me my central focal point. Bang! Right there. And I can do that. If this were a brown stain in there originally, then I wouldn't be able to actually wipe that off. And that's going to be the light on my lake back there. Again, it's a concept that I'm doing out of my head. So be patient, you'll have to see it. Furthermore, since I like to work with putting in central focal points and things early on, I'm going to take a paper towel. Now, for those of you that go plein air painting, you want to make sure that you have your paper towels under your arm. And I'm putting some turpentine on my paper towel, and I'm wiping off some light. Now I want most of the light to actually be against the trees here because my central focal point's down here. When I actually go up towards the top here, I'm going out of the central focal point area. So I don't want to have a lot of light up there, but I want to bring the light down here. It's so awesome because some of my students that were naysayers are starting to paint with light. And that's what we're doing here. When you understand how to paint with light, it changes everything. Not only that, once you start becoming sensitive to light, you can no longer look at paintings anymore by anybody without having to people say, where's your central focal point? So I'm going to put a little bit of light here, a little bit of light here. Now, I have commitment issues. So I don't commit to anything yet. This is my broad idea. And in a few minutes, I'll sit back and look at it and see if I think this would actually be a good idea for a painting. So this place exists only in my imagination, and yet it exists everywhere in Mount Shasta. So we got a half an hour. Stefan, shut up. Let's go paint. So I'm going to start taking white, and I'm going to go back into the sky. I want to lighten up. I want the sky to have a little bit of a luminous quality to it. And I carry a couple of different kinds of tubes of white. One's titanium, one's titanium zinc. Sometimes I got old tubes I need to get rid of. And if it's really thick and I can't move it, if it's not like soft butter, I will spend some time adding a little bit of liquid in it and take a knife and kind of loosen it up. Right now I just switched to another white that's a little softer. The medium I'm using is liquid, It's a good all-around medium. We'll be talking about mediums shortly in the future, but right now, and as things get closer to the horizon, they get lighter. And this is why I let my paint stay relatively dark while I was laying in the foundation, so that I can paint my light into it. The left-hand side is going to be a lighter value. And since I've got the rest of the canvas covered, I can actually kind of start gauging my values, softening up values without getting them too chalky. I don't understand how artists can sit and paint from the left-hand side and paint with a white canvas or nothing and not have an idea of the colors that they're using by the time they get to the foreground. So it's kind of good to kind of get the concept or the idea down. Now, some artists have contacted me through Patreon and said, is it okay at the preliminary stage to use acrylics? And it's like, by gosh, yes, it's no problem. This canvas that I'm using right now is acrylic primed anyway. And so you could put acrylics on top of that and then put oils on top of that. I'm still a purist when it comes to painting in oils. So when I actually start painting, I want it to be oil paints, but acrylics are fine for a foundation. Since I'm lightening my sky at this point around my mountains, I'm using lemon yellow and white. I'm going to try to be a little bit more cautious of my brush strokes so that they're interesting. Again, we're not painting a bathroom, even though our paintings might end up there, but nonetheless. One thing that I've been trying to get my students to do is when they go out to do plein air painting, to work on larger canvases. So this is a 14 by 18, and like I said, the reason why I'm working on this one is because I've got an awesome frame for it. But when I go outdoors to paint, I don't go, and I don't recommend getting little 8 by 10s or 9 by 12s, because they take as much time to create, and you don't get paid for them. So if you're doing a 12 by 16, first thing, a 12 by 16 is a proper painting that will find itself in the living room. Little 8 by 10s are in the bathroom again. I don't know why you always go to the bathroom today, but that's basically the theme of today. But a little 8 by 10s end up in little corners and cubbies, where 12 by 16s kind of are the proper size to come out. And for the amount of time it takes you is about the same, and you'll get like twice as much money for it if you're trying to market your work. So bigger canvases sell for higher prices usually. Although one of my favorite paintings of all time is a little Fragnard painting in San Francisco, and it's a little 5 by 7. It's two sisters pillow fighting. It's really great. Anyway, so size doesn't always matter, unless you got to make money at this. Okay, blend that in. You can see already that the sky is taking on a lighter, more atmospheric, and it's not chalky. And if I have a little bit more time, I'm going to go back and work on that a bit. So I'm going to now put in some lighting effects into Mount Shasta. The left-hand side is going to be more luminous. Here I'm taking phthalo red rose and lemon yellow, and I'm going to light up this side of the mountain. Always making sure that I have some interesting brush strokes. I want the bottom of the mountain, like I said, to be more luminous and brighter. So I'm going to put in more yellow and phthalo red rose. Again, once you go to phthalo red rose, it's really hard to go back to alizarin crimson. And again, permanent rose is the same color. It's just a Winsor Newton product. You can see that light is hitting the mountain there and some light hitting here. I could have left the canvas plain but you wouldn't have gotten the effect of that yellow in there. Now we're going to go from yellow to red, because we want to get that alpine glow. And usually when we have highlights, you know, when you think about the three primary colors, you go from a highlight to a transition color, and we go from yellow, red, and blue. So our shadow colors have more blue, more brown tones, more shadows in them. The highlight color is more of a lemon yellow. Sometimes it could be more orangey. And then depending on, notice how I'm taking the same color and going on the other side of the mountain. Now these colors, as things get further away from you, they get cooler. And these colors are actually a little cooler than what's happening in the foreground. So this will start actually cooling down the background mountains. So my mountain that I started off relatively dark is now starting to lighten up in value. You can see my foreground trees, which are going to be darker in value, not only because they're closer, but they're also vertical. They accept light differently. Anything that's going to be lit up, it's going to be anything at this angle that's going to be perpendicular to the light source. So angles have become a new key in my 16 keys I think I'm up to. But part of this whole painting process is for us to explore that. I'm thinking that I also would like to put in a glacier in here, just because it makes the mountain a little bit more interesting. And I'm just, at this point, just taking white by itself and squiggling it into this sunset color. Because not only would the mountain get an orange glow, which is the alpine glow from the light, but also the glaciers, the whites of the glaciers, would also have that alpine glow. You can cool things down with cool colors if you know what they are, and then you actually get like transitions between warm and cool. But if you really want the effect of light, you want to try to keep them separate from warm and cool. So
you're not mixing them into the warm?
I'm mixing them. Yeah, well, there was a warm color here, and I've actually like pushed that out and put the cool color in. So it's still there, but it's been kind of pushed aside. Now the paint that I'm putting in here for the glaciers, they're definitely put on thicker, and I'm laying them on top of this color. Some of that pink color is coming through that's underneath, and I actually want that. So I'm going to take some ultramarine blue and some white, and I'm going to go and put some snow into the, got to get a little bit lighter value. We're going to get some snow in between the mountains here. Put some little bluish cast in there. Notice I haven't changed my brush. If you have a really good brush, you can do little fine lines, just like that, little fine lines, look at that. Or fat lines. So you have this brush here, see the narrowness? So that's how narrow I can make a line that way. Or I can do it fat or in between. You can get all these different brush strokes. So you don't need a ton of brush strokes for everything. There's some artists that actually will keep their highlight colors and their shadow colors as separate on different brushes, but don't need a lot of brushes to do this. This one is a Black Gold Dynasty. I love these brushes. They're very inexpensive, and they just lay the paint down beautifully. Okay. So moving right ahead, we're going to put in the vertical trees, the other side of the lake. Now there's like two hillsides here. This is the furthest back one. And so I'm going to be doing this a little bit lighter green. I do want to kind of make it feel like Bunny Flats if I can. And then my darker green, which will be ultramarine blue or cobalt blue, in with my trees into shadow. And again, I'm using the same brush, and I'm just putting in little indications of verticals in here. And since we're going to move this along, I want to put in a little shoreline back in here. Little rocks kind of coming down. Now remember, we're not Xerox machines. So don't feel like just because you're someplace that you have to paint what you see. You can go and paint what you see. And you can change things to be anything you want. Take a little bit of a pinkish color. Again, I'm going to be taking my cadmium yellow, which is a warmer yellow, because these are in shadow. I'm adding some phthalo red rose to that. And I'm actually putting in a little shoreline in there that has a little bit more of an orange quality to it. Maybe even over here we'll put in some footnotes for rocks. Let's move forward here. This is going to be our lake. I'm going to take lemon yellow and white. And this is going to be my highlight. I'm going to be leaving this bright and sparkly. And as we get further into the lake here, we're going to transition into a darker color. Notice all of these colors were put in relatively dark, and now I'm kind of going in and lightening them all up. So this is phase one of my painting. If I would actually be working in a studio or even out there, I would put in another hour going back in and correcting this. But since we're only doing an hour, and since I'm trying to talk in between, you're going to see pretty much what I can do in this short period of time. But I definitely would go back in and revamp it a bit. So I'm bringing a little bit of that cerulean blue, which is the sky color that we have in there. And then pretty much as we get into an area where there's no light, which is this area in here, we're just going to be putting in the vertical strokes. Remember, water is vertical, 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 vertical. Always be pulling the colors down. You could pull up some of the orange colors that we're using in the mountain. Again, yellow and red together. Pull that color down into the water. Vertical again, vertical strokes, vertical strokes. As we get to the far right-hand side, we want to darken it because we want more of the feeling of dark in there. And plus also, the only thing that ever reflects in water is light. Dark doesn't reflect in water, it just becomes dark. So there's nothing up here that's going to be bouncing and making a reflection. Sometimes you see a tree reflecting in the water, and that's usually because everything around it is lit up, and you'll see the reflection, but you actually can see through the reflection at the ground underneath because the tree isn't reflected. It's actually blocking the light. So, okay. So when we get this all vertical in like this, vertical, vertical, clean your brush really well. This would be a good time for you to actually get a clean brush, but I'm going to try to do it with this brush. And we start doing our horizontal strokes. So we go horizontal, go back and forth horizontal, and we flatten it just like that. For those of you that watch Bob Ross, this should look familiar, except I'm not using a house brush. Anyway, so you drag the light color into the shadow color, clean your brush, and it flattens all out, and you get a beautiful sense of a reflection. I'm going to just... Now these are nylon brushes, so I brag about how wonderful these black golds are, but they're nylon brushes, and after they're used for a while, the nylon kind of starts absorbing, and the brush doesn't quite get such a nice tip to it. So let's go ahead and start laying in the base color for our trees on the left. And I get really lazy, and I just kind of start pushing all of my paint together. So I'm going to squeeze out some more ultramarine blue. And we're going to start painting this. Now when we put these trees in, we want to make sure first thing that we don't have 4 of them. And what we want to do is kind of stack them so they're not all the same. So this one's going to be like the highest one. And then I put a second one in there. These ones will be a little bit lower. Still working with the same brush, but we'll probably switch over to a fan brush when I get a little bit more serious over here. I may take the next one right out of the canvas. Now here's a nice little friendly note, is that it's okay to have something inside the painting going out. That's perfectly fine, as long as it originates from inside the painting. But you don't want to have something from the outside of the painting coming in. So you don't want branches that kind of come in from a tree that's out here. You also have to pay attention to, you don't start a huge tree here. If you're going to do a big foreground tree, you don't start it and stick it on the edge, because then the painting looks like it only starts right there and goes over. So, and I'm using ultramarine blue and asphaltum. Now, the reason why I like using those two colors is that if we take something that's lit and we take away the light from it, the default color of light is somewhere between that asphaltum ultramarine blue color. And so it's always a really good start. I'm going to start going in, start bringing in my drawing from my campsite. I want to take some of this orangey color that I have in the foreground, what I have back there, but just darker in the front. Now all the colors that I'm putting in the front should be tempered with yellows and lighter colors, and not so much with white. We're going to be putting some of these rocks in the foreground. There's a big boulder here. That was the one that you saw in the photo. There's another boulder right here that we'll put in later. This would be a nice sheltered area for something that looks like a campsite. But I will be popping some of this painting on Patreon, and you get to have a little bit more detailed conversation about how this gets done from the preliminary. But right now I've kind of accomplished what I wanted. Kind of feels like it's a nice rich soup to work with. And while we're here, I'm going to carry on painting with this and discuss some of the details. Like I said, if you want to know more about what we're doing, you can go over on Patreon. You can watch some of these videos. I discuss all this stuff on YouTube. If I were doing this on location, this would be like the first half hour. Of course, I spent the first half hour talking about studios, but it's about a third done. I would spend another hour and a half getting as far forward as I wanted, as I can out there before the lighting changed. Of course, if we're painting in twilight like this, the light would be changing and would be getting pretty dark. But you'll find out if you start painting in that darkness, when it gets darker and darker, your painting will actually get better and better. So even when you go out and paint in nocturnes, it's surprising what you can actually see once you cover your canvas. And when you come to the workshops, which are in October and or May, we do nocturnes both nights, and they're pretty spectacular. The workshops are filling up, so you want to be sure that you make a reservation there and call me up and make sure that we get you in there. If you get my answering machine, just leave a message. I'll get back with you for sure. If you want more information about coaching, you can give me a call at 415-606-9074. All this information is up on stefanbaumann.com, where you can also get a free book if you go and register there. It's absolutely free. It's right on the top. It says free book. Just fill that out. Anyways, so I thank you so much for joining us. Next week we're going to maybe carry on with this painting, or I might start something even more spectacular than this. And until then, always remember, don't go into your studio unless you're going to change the world, and always remember to paint with passion. I'm Stefan Baumann, and thank you so much for joining us. Wow, there was a lot of information in that little video. If you would like to get a free book, please don't hesitate to go to my website at www.stefanbaumann.com, and there you can get a free book, Everything I Know About Painting. If you'd like to get more information about my PBS show or about my Patreon site, which is absolutely amazing, I highly recommend, if you can't get coaching, that the Patreon site is second to the coaching. There's a lot of information that I put up there solely for Patreon students. If you'd like to get coaching, please don't hesitate to give me a call at 415-606-9074. And that's my personal phone number. You can just give me a call and we could talk about enrolling you in some of my coaching programs. They are absolutely amazing. And if you want to see some of the work that my students do, go to my website, go to the coaching section, and scroll down to the bottom and look at paintings done in the program. You'll be amazed at the quality that my students produce. It is truly an honor to be their coach. Until next time, always remember, don't go into your studio unless you're going to change the world, and always remember to paint with passion. I'm Stefan Baumann, and have a grand day.